So first of all, the exam is on Monday at 10 a.m. There are 10 questions that are worth 2 points each, 16 questions that are worth 5 points each. The 4 sample questions that you're going to be doing today in ExamSoft, 2 of them are sort of like the 2-point questions, 2 are like the 5-point questions, so I'll point those out to you afterwards. I'll also show you after you get done what we do to sort of deal with rounding and stuff. So you should have a much better vision on how all of that works by the end of the day today. We will send an email this evening when all the sections are done. So the last section finishes about 7:30 this evening. So it won't be until probably 9 or 10 that I send it. With details about the exam. It'll include all the stuff that I'm telling you right now. It will be available to download on Sunday. So you'll get an email saying exam is available to download. It's generally a good idea to just get it downloaded right away. The last thing you need to be doing is downloading the exam right before you take it. That's just, it makes you anxious. You don't think as clearly. And then the password gets emailed 5 minutes before the exam. So for those of you who are taking the main exam at 10 a.m., the password will get emailed at 9:55. And for those who are taking the makeup at 9, the password gets emailed at 8:55 p.m. And then finally, the exam is open book, open notes. Absolutely no communication with anyone, anyone's in any way. But it is open book and open notes. The one caveat there that I think some people sort of discovered in the spring is I think a lot of us, when we hear open book, you think, oh, okay, I don't need to study because I'm going to be able to look up anything I need to. The caution is for this has, these exams are really testing whether or not you know how to apply what you've learned. So looking things up doesn't actually, looking up formulas helps, but most other things don't help you a lot to look up. And if you're counting on looking things up, it ends up just being too slow. Really, this exam tests how well you look at a problem, know what to do, and do it. So what you want to do is put the time in practicing. To the extent that there are things that you find are useful to have available, organize them in one place. Have the formula sheet where you can get to it. The formula sheet is in the exam, but it's a lot easier if you're not trying to get at it in the exam. So open it up on your phone or something. If there's a slide that you find particularly helpful, if there's a problem that you did in the practice exam where the instructions are helpful, organize that all in one place so you can get it really quickly. And that'll put you in a much better place for the exam. I am going to be doing office hours over the weekend. There weren't a lot of people at office hours yesterday. So what I will do is 9 a.m. on Saturday morning and 1 p.m. on Sunday. What I'm trying to do is straddle different sorts of time zones and do 1 per day. So I realize that for some of you, one of those is going to end up being in the middle of the night, but that'll at least take care of most people. So what I'm going to do is stop this. And before we move on to the new NPV material, what I'm going to do, and I need to open it on my Finance Lab first. What I'm going to do is show you a way to sort of, I'm going to use my Finance Lab as a way to practice the using the CFJ key. It's a really good resource to use it, but you've got to be able to do it right. And I've often told you that my Finance Lab is a good way to do drills. You can kind of use it like flashcards. So what I'm going to do is give you an example of that. Let me open the problem so that I make sure that it shows up on the screen share. There we go. Screen share. So I'll do this on mine, but I'm going to show, after we do it, I'll show you how to make sure you get it. But how you get this, you could do it on your own with different numbers. The way that you get at this is to go into my Finance Lab. On the left-hand side, on that bar on the left-hand side, there's something that says results. If you click on results, you can get into any of the problems that you've done for homework in the past, in this course, not in previous courses. you can get into the practices, the problems that you've done for homework in the past, and you can go back and you can do them again. And what I'm going to show you here is that every time you tell ExamSoft to give you my Finance Lab to give you a similar problem, what'll happen is that they'll change the numbers. So it's a really good way to just get more effective, get quicker on your calculator. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this. We're going to do these two, and then I'm going to have it give us another problem. So basically what you're going to do here, take out your calculators, is we're going to do 4 practices. All right. So one critical thing about using the CFJ key for net present value is that the first thing that you input is at time 0. And in this problem, we're not going to do the password yet. We'll do it in an hour. I'll give you the password when we all do it together. You don't need a password to download it. So in this problem, there isn't anything at time 0. So you have to put a 0 at time 0. So take out your calculators, and we're going to put the numbers into the CFJ key. So 0 CFJ, 12 CFJ, 24 CFJ, 36 CFJ, 48 CFJ, 60 CFJ. The interest rate is up here, it's 9.8. So 9.8 is your interest. And then the orange shift key and NPV is going to give us 128.65. And so now we're going to do the second one. You have to clear your calculator. 0 CFJ, 60, 48, 36, 24, 12. Again, 9.8 is our interest rate. I'll wait a moment for you to catch up before I put the number in there. It's 180. Sooner or later, I'm going to get one of these wrong. Oops. I didn't know I was about to get that wrong. Hold on. I talk and input at the same time, and it doesn't work very well. There you go, 145.69. And it's actually good to sort of look at this concept here, because we do put concept questions into the exam. Krish, thank you. I should have just believed you and put it in there. So what's happening here is that when you have a present value equation, larger numbers up front are going to be the higher present value because they're being discounted less. So having the larger numbers occur sooner, you're going to have a higher present value. So in this case, the present value in part B is higher because the numbers occur sooner. So now what you do is, after you check it, so this is where I'm showing you how you can use this to practice calculator stuff. Instead of saying next question, just hit the X. And what's going to happen is you now can come down to this blue button that says similar question, and it'll give it to you again, but with different numbers. So go ahead and do this. And part of what I'm doing here is getting you to think about the fact that using a calculator at some level is muscle memory. And you're doing a mix between understanding the concepts, but once you know what you have to do for the problem, you want to be able to do it efficiently. And the more efficiently you do it, the more time you have left to think about other problems. So we'll do this one, and then we'll move back to the slide deck. I'll see if I can get this one right. 0, 10, 22, 34, 46, 58. Then 10.6 is the interest. $117.95 is NPV. And then the second one, we'll clear it. 0, 58, 46, 34, 22, 10, 10.6 is still the interest. And you literally, for a certain part of the exam, just being really good at getting these numbers in right is going to make it so that you have more time to spend the time reading the question and making sure that you understand what the question is. So it's a good way to use my finance lab. If you go back to the assignment for class 2, there's a couple of problems in there that are asking, it's like one cash flow and asking for present value, or one cash flow and asking for future value. So those can be a good way to practice some of the other keys on the top. So I will show you quickly before I move back to the PowerPoint where the results thing is. So when you open my finance lab, over here on the left-hand side, there is something on this bar that says results. I don't have any results because I don't do the homework in the homework. It'll only show you results from homework you've actually done. So what's really important is that even if there's some day that you've decided for some reason you're going to skip the homework, open it so you have access to it. The other place you can go get problems is if you click on this thing that says study plan, and then go to all chapters, because you probably don't want to do decimals. So you go to all chapters. The material we're doing right now is we've done chapter 3, chapter 4, and the first section of chapter 8. So you could go into 4.1 and find a problem. So you can find other problems that we haven't assigned that you can use for practice. All right. Take us back to our PowerPoint. So most of what we're going to do today is going to be doing some more work with net present value, more work with the CFJ key. The very last thing that we're going to do is look at, if you've got right now, everything we've been doing so far, we've given you a problem and said, what's the value today? Or we've given you a problem and said, what's the value in the future? And the last thing we're going to do is look at problems where we say, here's the value today, here's the value in the future, here's the interest rate, how many years was it, or here's the number of years, what was the interest rate? So that'll be the last thing we'll do today. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about NPV. So what NPV gets used for a lot in the business world is looking at business proposals, looking at things that you might do and trying to figure out whether you have a net positive present value or a negative present value. So this isn't, you know, if you and your roommate were thinking about starting a business, making brownies in the evening, and most businesses, you have to invest something at the beginning. So it's going to cost $85 to buy the cooking equipment, to buy your, to make your brownies. So that investment is going to be negative. That's an outflow. That's your investment. And then you're going to earn cash flows over the 4 years that you're in college. So we've got positive cash flows for years 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what you could earn in your savings account is 10%. So it's like that, using the bank account as a benchmark. We want to make sure that we're going to get at least 10% on this project if we're going to do it, because otherwise we'd be better off putting the money in our savings account. So we've been doing a lot with the CFJ key. So go ahead and put these numbers into the CFJ key and put the answer in the chat box when you get it. Exactly. So just as a reminder what you're actually doing here, because one of the, the reason we work with the formulas for, for 2 classes before we show you the calculator is we want to make sure you're really aware of what you're doing, but now we're all using the calculator. So what we just did, what we had the calculator do for us is take all those different cash flows, find the value of each one of them at time 0, and add them up to find the net present value. So the present value of the costs was your 85, and the present value of the benefits was all of these numbers. And you got 5.93. Now, one of the other questions that you're going to ask if you're thinking about a business is, what is my return on this business? What % return am I getting? Another way to think about that is, what would be the discount rate that would make it so that my net value was exactly 0? Like, how high of a discount rate can I use before I get to the point that those cash flows in the future don't have enough value in the present to cover my upfront investment? So what that would mean is that you're looking for the R that would set all of your future cash flows exactly equal to the $85 investment. Doing that mathematically would take a long time. You'd have to just keep trying different things until you found the right number. You could use goal seek in Excel if you're good at Excel, but you actually have a key on your calculator that will do it for you. And what this is called is the internal rate of return. What is the rate of return that these numbers are producing? So the way that you do that, so you don't, if you keep your numbers in your calculator, you don't need to put them in again, just leave them there. So you've already put all those cash flows in. Now what you're going to do is press the orange shift key again, and then up here in the second row in the middle, the orange letters there say IRR. And when you press that button, you should get 12.92.
I just have a quick question.
And what I'm going to do while you still have the numbers in the calculator is play around with it a little bit. But one thing I'm going to point out before I do that is that to get the IRR, you don't need to put anything in the interest key. The IRR is an interest. So you don't need to put anything in the interest key to calculate IRR. Often when you're doing a problem, you're wondering both about the NPV and the IRR, so you might have put an interest in there. But what I want to point out to you in terms of using the calculator, is that once you have the cash flows in there, you can keep changing the interest rate to see what the net present value would be at different rates. So leave all those numbers in there, and we're going to play around with it a little bit. So put in 5 for your interest rate. Thank you, Alice. I'm still not hearing it though. Somebody say something.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
Sorry. When
No, sorry.
This is aside from this problem, but so I was doing some of the practice exam problems last night, and like sometimes my rounded answers like would be off by like let's say the answer was like 12.22, like I would get like 12.21. Like it's off by like, I don't know why, like my calculator like calculated a little bit differently. Like how is the rounding gonna work if like we're one decimal place off? Like, because I know sometimes some calculators or some things like round it differently. So I was just wondering.
So what I'm going to do, there's going to be 2 answers to that. And I'll be able to show you a little bit better when we do the thing in ExamSoft later on today. But so one of the answers is that what we'll tell you, and I'm going to put it in the email tonight, is that whenever you're doing problems, if there's an interim step that you write down on a pad of paper, write it down out to 4 decimal points. So as long as you do everything to 4 decimal points, you're going to be fine.
Okay.
And what we do is we go in and look at the range of answers that you would get. But the other thing that I'm going to show you is that when you do a fill in the blank exam in ExamSoft, what happens is that we put an answer in. And if you didn't, like, let's say I said the answer was rabbit and you put in, 20, it would be wrong. But if the answer was 20 rabbits, I look at it and go 20. Okay, that's right. And then I turn it into a right answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the screen in ExamSoft where we look at all the different answers that everybody gives us. And it's pretty obvious which ones are right. In the exam, I say this more than once because it's important for people to understand it. In the exam, the questions will say, show us a percentage with 2 decimal points. So the reason for that is that there's certain problems that if you don't give us enough information, you could have done it the wrong way and got the same number. So we're telling you how much you need to give us in order to know that you got it right. But for these problems, there's a room for a fair amount of rounding.
Okay, but you think if our calculator is set to 4 decimal places, then we should be fine, right?
So the one warning I'm going to give you there is if I tell you I want 4 decimal points for that, 12.92% is 0.192%. So what I usually tell people is do 5 decimal points so that if it's a percentage, you make sure you've got it right.
Okay.
So I usually tell people set it for 5.
Okay.
A lot of people say set it for 6. At some point, if there's too many numbers, I just don't see what they're telling me.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a balance between too much information and so 5 seems to be a good number to work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no, that's a really good question. I apologize for.
I know, sorry. I know it kind of like interrupted this problem.
No, that is absolutely fine. And I want to make sure that everybody sees what Mary just said, and I didn't probably pick up on it fast enough because she has her 1:30 class on Thursdays, but she's doing extra office hours at 8 o'clock on Sunday. So I will show you where all the TA extra office hours are. What we did was had them try to come up with a mix of different time zones. So you can go to anybody's you want. It doesn't have to be just Mary's. It can be Oliver, it can be Andrew, it can be Sarah. And sometimes going to more than one is good because they'll explain things different ways, or you go to, there's sort of problem solving sessions. So there's 6 or 7 or 20 people on Zoom at the same time and somebody asks a question and you're like, oh, that's a good one. or you can just sign in and sit there and do problems. And if you happen to bump into a question, then raise your hand and ask it. So you don't have to go with a specific question. You can just treat it as a problem session. So anyhow, she's 8 o'clock on Sunday. All right. So everybody has these numbers in their calculators. Do them with 5% in the interest key.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so say you're trying to find that 12.925% value and you don't have an interest rate, like would you be able to like backtrace it without an interest rate?
12.92 is your interest rate.
Oh.
That is that we're going to hold that question, okay? Because we're going to explore that a little bit more. It is a rate.
Okay.
It's a rate of return.
Okay.
So if you put 5% in, you should have gotten 17.70. So what I'm going to do as we're doing this is keep our little cash flow thing up here, our formula. So when we did it earlier, we did it at 10%, and at 10%, it was 5.93. Now we dropped it to 5%, and it went up to 1770. Now let's do it at a rate that's higher than the internal rate of return. Let's do it at 20%. Put 20% as your interest in your calculator. You should get minus 1208. So what's happening here is that if we put present value on the y-axis and the interest rate on the x-axis, as our interest rate goes up, our present value goes down. So when we did it at 5%, we have a present value that's maybe 17.7. When we did it at 10%, we have a present value that's 5.93. When we did it at 20%, the present value's gone down below 0, and it was minus 1208. So this point right here, where our present value equals 0, that is where R equals the IRR. That's what this 12.92% is. It's the rate where the NPV would be 0. So put 12.92% in for your interest rate and do the NPV. And you're actually going to get 0.002 something, but basically you're going to get 0. That's what that means. That's the point where at that point, if the rate of return that you're looking for is 12.92%, your upfront investment will exactly equal your cash flows there. So this next slide sort of talks about that a little bit more, but sort of playing with the numbers first helps that. So what the IRR is it's the discount rate that's going to make the present value of all of the future cash flows, so the present value of all of those benefits in the future, exactly equal to the present value of your costs. Now, sometimes, as you'll find out when you're working on the practice exam, you have a situation where you invest something up front, and then you might have to invest more 2 or 3 years from now. Like maybe in your brownie business, you discover that all that cooking equipment's going to wear out, and you have to buy some more stuff in 2 years. So there can be costs at different times. But this is the IRR is the discount rate where you're making the present value of your benefits exactly equal to the present value of your costs. And if that is true, NPV is going to equal 0. And what it's telling you is it's telling you your expected return on your investment. So what we're going to do is play with some numbers here. So for those of you who watch slide numbers, we have 14 slides today. This is a relatively short day on slides, so we have lots of time to play around. So when you get these numbers, put them in the chat box. Great. So this last question here is playing around with the concept we were talking through earlier. So if the IRR is 8.7%, what's the NPV at 8.7%? Excellent. Because that is exactly what the IRR is doing. It's telling us the NPV at 0. So there's a case where if you know that, if we happen to put that as a question on an exam, you'd be really quick at answering that question. Okay, so we have one more slide here that's related to using the CFJ key. And it's a slide that's intended to make sure that you understand exactly how to use it. So what I'm going to do with this is usually the slide that if we were in the building in Boston, I put this up and tell everybody, go to Starbucks, take a picture of the slide, do it on your calculator while you're in line at Starbucks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what this slide does, explain to you how it works, give you a 10-minute break, and just tell you to get it done, but turn off your video. It probably won't take you that long to do it, so you can take a little bit of a break as well. And so the critical thing about how this works is that what the calculator is programmed to do is if you put a whole bunch of inputs into your CFJ key, so I'll write it out here. What it's doing is it's taking this number and assuming that it's right now, that n equals 0. It's taking this number and saying n equals 1. This number, n equals 2, and so forth. So it's actually doing a present value calculation for each of your cash flows, and you're not putting in an n, but it's picking up the n from the order that you do it. So because that is true, it means that the order you put these numbers in is critical, or else it's going to be calculating them wrong. So what that means is that the first number has to be at time 0. So if we give you a problem that doesn't have anything at time 0, you have to enter something for time 0. If you have 2 cash flows in 1 year, you have to combine them, add them together or subtract one from the other. So in this table down here, we have an example of that. If you put minus 12 here and put the 18 out there, it would treat the 18 as if it happened 3 years from now instead of 2 years from now. So you would have to combine those and just put 6 for time 2. It also means if there's a year that doesn't have a cash flow, so right here, you'd have to put a 0 in. So what this slide is designed to do is to have you make sure that you picked up what the top of the slide said for every one of those situations. So you're going to use 8%. That also lets you practice the calculator. This one's normal. This one has a blank at time 0. This one has 2 combined at time 2. And this one has a blank at time 2. And what you want to do is do them all and make sure you get that number over on the far side. So right now it is 20 minutes to 2. And what you're going to do is you're going to do these, make sure you can make them work. Give yourself a break so you can walk around the house doing them, turn off your videos, and be back at, I'm losing track of what's going on with the time here. 1:40, be back at 1:50. Start that sentence again. I just started the recording again. There's one other thing we're going to do before we switch over to doing that exam soft thing. So, and that is that we're going to show you how to solve for rate of return and how to solve for how many years has it been. So the first thing we'll look at is rate of return. What is the return that you got? What is the rate that makes the present value of the benefits offset the cost, which actually is what we were just doing with the IRR. What's different here is that we're looking at it when it's just 2 cash flows as opposed to a whole string of cash flows. So the thing I want you to do here first before we actually talk about how to do this problem is I'm going to pull up the share the calculator and have you do it wrong, because it's a really useful it's useful for you to know what's going wrong when it goes wrong. So just go with it, even though we know, well, some of you are going to know I'm doing it wrong. So what I want you to do here is put in 1,000 for the present value, 2,000 for the future value, 6 for N, and then hit the interest button. You got no solution, right? This will happen. I promise you. You'll be in a rush. You won't be paying attention. It's going to happen. The reason it's happening is that you've put in both the present value and the future value as a positive number. And the calculator is assuming that in order that one of them has to be an outflow. Your investment could be an outflow and then you get the money at the end, or you might be getting the money at the beginning and paying it back at the end, but one of them has to be an outflow. So what we're going to do is change it so that the 1,000 is a negative number. And the easiest way to do that is put in the 1,000 and hit this plus minus button. Now say present value. 2,000 is your future value. 6 is your N. And now when you hit interest, you're going to get 12.25. And the reason that I do that with you is because if that happens in the middle of the exam, your reaction is there's something wrong with your calculator. Your calculator broke. So my goal is to have you realize now that when you see that, it's just because you put all the numbers in as positives, and you've got to just go back and get the inputs right. So when your calculator says no solution, it's just that the inputs are wrong. All right, so back to our slide deck. And this is actually the exact same problem that I just had you do. So we have an investment opportunity where we're going to have a $1,000 investment today. So here's our timeline. At time 0, we're putting in minus 1,000. In 6 years, we're going to get $2,000. So present value is minus 1,000. Future value is 6,000. N is 6. And you solve for I. You could also do this mathematically. You could rearrange this equation and solve for R, but it's usually faster to do on the calculator. So the other thing that we're going to do is solve for the number of periods. So an example of that is, let's imagine, oops, come back here. Let's imagine that we want to buy a sailboat, and the sailboat is going to cost us $16,500. We've already saved $9,400. We're going to earn 7.25%. So the question is, how long will it take? So if our present value is minus 9,400, again, you're going to have to put one of those in as a negative. The future value is 16,500. Interest is 7.25. Solve for N. And it'll take 8 years. So any questions on that before we look at the exam solve stuff? So I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop this share.
We're not being graded on the exam. These questions.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is entirely for you. Let me, all right, recorder's back on. So again, for anyone who knows how to do these, doesn't have any questions about practice exams, you can leave class now if you want. So you're done with what you're required to be here for. That got at least 3 of you. Okay. So the one thing I'm going to tell you before I start doing the actual problems is that this one and this one, number 2 and number 4, and this one I didn't have randomized so that whatever you thought was number 2 would be number 2. These are the kinds of problems that would be the 2-point problems. And in general, these are the ones that would take 1 to 1.5 minutes to do. I realize that doesn't mean that's how long they took you to do today, but in terms of understanding sort of what's the structure, those are 1 to 1.5 minute questions. These other 2, would be 5-point questions. And on average, these are 3-minute questions. And when I say on average, what that means is that, you know, some of them are 4-minute questions and some of them are 2-minute questions. So we went through, you know, paired them all up and then came up with an average of 3 minutes. So the structure of the exam is 16 questions that we're assuming are 3-minute questions, and 10 questions that that the average is 1.25 minutes. So you put all of that together. This is 12.5. Whoops, no, that one's not. I just wrote that in the wrong place. That one's 12.5. $12.25, and that's 48. So that's where the 60 minutes is coming from. So what you want to do is really think in terms of, for problems that are like these 2-point problems, get really good at just looking at them and getting them in your calculator quickly. We've put in, in the class 2 slide deck, we had drills in there to practice the calculator. All of these are things that if you practice, you're going to get to the point you're doing them in 30 seconds. So that frees up time for the ones you have to think about. So I'm going to do those two-point questions first. And then I'll do the other ones. So this one, again, timelines are critical. Four years ago, you put 280 in. You put it in, that's going to be an outflow, so that's a negative. And here is time 4, and you now have 412. So present value is minus 280. Future value is 412. N is 4, and you solve for I. This one here, 3 years from today, you're going to get 100,000. The interest rate is 7%. And the question is, how much could you borrow today? So future value is 100,000. N equals 3, and you solve for present value. And now we'll do those other two. So number one, when you all were watching me do the correction, it's pretty clear that that was the one that everybody had the hardest time with. One of the reasons I put this in there is to make sure we went over it, because it often is one of the ones on the exam that people have the hardest time with. When you open the exam, when you open the answers to look at the results, we included this thing that they call rationale that explains how to do the problems. So for these ones, the rationale was what I just explained. For this one, there's more than one way to do this. So the point of it is that you need to take, the question is the value at year 5. So we want to know right here. So we're going to have to take, it's just like that timeline worksheet we did on Tuesday. All of these numbers have to come to time 5 and get added up. So this is going to be N is 2. This is N is 3. This is N is 4. And these two numbers, we have to discount them back to time 5. So that would be discounted 1 year. That would be discounted 2 years. So one way to do the problem would be to take each of these individual numbers and move it to time 5, the same way we did with that timeline worksheet that we did on Tuesday, and add them all up. That's the concept. The efficient way to do it, now that we've learned about net present value. So one of the things we talked about on Tuesday is that once you find the value of a group of numbers at any time on your timeline, you can move that value to other places. So the most efficient way to do this is to use your CFJ key. So we can use the CFJ key to find the NPV at time 0, and then we can find the value of that at time 5. If we do that, we need to remember that we need to put in a 0 at time 0 and a 0 at time 4 And then this is going to be the string that we put into our CFJ key. So we're going to do that, and then I'll show you how to find the time 5 value. So the inputs for CFJ are 0, 50, 30, turn it into a negative, so hit the plus minus key, 40, 0, 60, 80, 30, and then you're going to put in the interest rate of 6%. And the net present value is 175,2387. To find it at year 5, we're going to move it forward 5 years and find the future value. So what you can do, because you've already got the 175,2387 in your calculator, just hit the present value key, and it's putting that number into the present value. So what we'll do now is make this our present value. We'll make N5, I is 6, and then just solve for future value, and it'll give you the value at time 5. I'm going to clean up some space here so we can do number 3. So for number 3, what's happening from a timeline perspective is that we're going to get 150,000 today. We're going to get 400,000 in 1 year. And the kayaks are going to cost us $300 each to manufacture, and there's 600 kayaks. So 300 times 600 equals 180,000. So we're going to subtract 180,000 at year 0. So our cash flow at year 0 is minus 30,000. So our net at year 0 is minus 30,000 plus the value today of 400,000. Interest rate's 4%. So plus 400,000 divided by 1.04. All right. So the other things that we can work on today, depending on what people want to work on, is in Questrom Tools, we've posted the practice exam problems for week 3. So this is actually a good, let me share it. This is a good mix of problems to work on right now. So I've got that screen shared, so we can work on these problems. You also can open up the practice problems and look at those. A few comments on on preparing for exams. With this material, what we have discovered is that the most valuable use of the practice problems is as a learning tool. So don't save them for the night before the exam to check whether you know it. Go ahead and use them. People learn a lot from looking at the problems because it makes you think about things from a different perspective. Something that can be a really effective study tool with a study partner is to pair up and take problems and change them. I mean, you can already kind of look at these and realize you've seen multiple versions of the same problem. So when you get really good at looking at a problem and saying, what could I do to turn this into another problem? You've gotten really good at analyzing problems, and you'll be way more tuned in to getting them right. So that's a useful thing to do. Practice your calculator skills. Be really good at making sure you pay attention to what is it asking. A lot of times the answer is wrong just because that wasn't what the question was. A colleague of mine once said that he taught students to read questions backwards. And when I first heard that, I thought that was really weird. But one of the things that happens when you read a question backwards, so if you read this last phrase first and then go work backwards, discount rate 5%, received 300 for 6 years, it breaks up the story. You don't get caught up in the story. It's breaking it up in a way that a lot of people pick up the information better that way. So, and even what I told you about organizing the materials, so if there's things you think you want during the exam, you've got them all where you can get to them really quickly. One of the things that one of my students did once was picked all the PowerPoint slides that she thought were useful and made her own little slide deck of the like 5 or 6 slides she wanted to be able to use. So doing that, your brain is thinking about what's useful. There's probably a chance you won't even need to look at the slides. So again, we have a half hour, so we're just going to turn this into a problem session or office hours or whatever. And if you find that